a soldier, and a fighter.
All of this is Gunditjmara country from the north, Graham, to the south, from the east to the west. The whole lot of it, as far as the eye can see from this feature, is Gunditjmara country. This particular feature was a great meeting place for the Gunditjmara people. The whole lot of it is Gunditjmara country. So it was all ours one time, mate, the whole bloody issue of it.
The Gunditjmara wore clothes, lived in houses in villages, moving only seasonally to where the food sources were. They were not nomadic.
What mostly did they eat?
They ate everything, ducks. There was plenty of them, swans, there's plenty of swans, kangaroos, wallabies. They threw boomerangs over the flocks of ducks in the water, which panicked them. The ducks immediately dived into the reeds and wherever they could hide because they thought the boomerangs were hawks. And they caught them then. No, another way they caught them, of course, was they'd open a hollow into the banks, big enough for the duck to crawl in. They filled these hollows up with food and the ducks would go in feeding. And, of course, ducks can't walk backwards.
That's right.
So they just reached in and pulled them out.
How did they catch the fish?
Well, there was a number of ways they caught fish. First of all, the most primitive way would be just to go into the water and spear them. The second way was a very sophisticated way, was they built fish traps, a series of fish traps, so that when the eels did start to travel towards the sea, that they would be caught up in these fish traps, in a series of traps. And then they were put into holding pens.
Unlike the white settlers to come, there is evidence that the tribes treated their lands in an ecologically sensitive way.
They lived in complete accord with what you see out there, the animals, the trees, the water, and the whole thing itself. They didn't have any starvation. There was no famines because there was plenty of food. They didn't have any wars because there was no conflict over land. There was some payback, skirmishes, perhaps because someone stole someone else's wife, which was against the law anyway. They played games, they made boomerangs, they hunted, they lived, and they enjoyed each other's company.
This here, mate, that's the old woman what they used to make.
Banjo Clark is a Gunditjmara elder, Graham's great-uncle and leading fan. A prominent ex-boxer and athlete himself, Banjo lives with members of his family at the Framlingham Aboriginal settlement near Warrnambool. Framlingham is one of only 2 areas of the original Gunditjmara land still cared for by tribal members. The other is at Lake Conda. Elders like Banjo are finding it increasingly more difficult to pass on the heritage, customs and traditions to the younger members, many of whom have gravitated to the big cities. Until this visit to the lands of his ancestors, Graham had only a limited knowledge of his tribe's history and traditions. His experience was limited to sporting boxing figures. Reg tells of the event which was to spell the end of the almost utopian lifestyle enjoyed by the Gunditjmara and other Victorian tribes.
And one day a Gunditjmara man walked down to around about here. He looked out to sea and he saw away out at sea what he thought was a large white bird. And he went back into where his people were, sheltering just a little inland, and he told them, and they didn't believe him, of course. So they all came down to have a look, but they didn't know what it was because they'd never seen a sailing ship before. That was also the beginning for the Aboriginal people, the beginning of the Holocaust that was to last for the next 120, 30 years perhaps. The sealers and whalers were here because of the Napoleonic Wars, and they were collecting fur seals and whale oil for those particular wars.
Contact with the Aborigines was fairly peaceable, yet the very presence of these foreigners meant death for thousands of Aborigines. For one thing, they introduced alcohol, a great curse upon the Aboriginal peoples.
Also, it would be interesting to note that on board the whalers were Negro cooks and stewards. But of course, when the Negroes did come ashore and live with the Aboriginals and also contact with the early sealers and whalers, there would be introduced diseases that would be quite exotic to the Aboriginal people because they had no resistance to even things as the common cold or influenza or consumption, and through contact with Aboriginal women, the venereal diseases that were brought across from Europe and other parts of the world.
News of the fertile land of the Gunditjmara was spread by the whalers. Settlers like the Henties arrived from Tasmania, most of the arable land there having been taken up. They had sent application for a huge tract of land to the colonial authorities in London, but did not wait for a reply. They simply arrived and took up that land illegally. Major Mitchell, the famous explorer, came overland from Sydney and declared the area to be most suitable for settlement. He called it Australia Felix. The settlers duly arrived, brought sheep, cattle and shepherds, then their families. They were here to stay.
Then the Aboriginals became aware that their land was being occupied. So the first things they did was started to kill the cattle, drive the cattle off, drive the sheep off because they were polluting the waterholes and the rivers and the streams. Australian animals, incidentally, don't do that. And so this brought them into immediate conflict with the settlers.
The now hungry natives set fire to the bush around shepherds' huts. The shepherds used guns to drive them off. The natives fought back with spears. Hostilities had begun.
The White brothers, when they took up a run or a selection in the Western District, they immediately shot and killed quite a large number of Aboriginal people, men, women and children from one clan. In another instance, there were a number of Aboriginal tribes people, 51 in all, that were killed in a massacre. And the place where that occurred is now known as Murdering Flats. Later on, there were instances recorded of Aboriginals being given flour, which was poisoned, and this, of course, got to the women and the children and the men, because they all partook of the dampers and stuff that they made from the flour. Aboriginals very often drove sheep and cattle off cliffs.
It was a form of guerrilla warfare, and it was effective. Then came drought, and attacks by the starving Aboriginals increased. The Portland Mercury was moved to declare the country might as well be in a state of civil war, as few but the boldest will move from their home stations. Some settlers invented a new pastime, the Sunday hunt. The idea was to hunt down and kill Aboriginal men, women and children for sport. These hunts were referred to in settlers' diaries, but always in guarded and justified terms, for they were illegal. In Melbourne in the 1840s, 9 Europeans were tried for shooting a black. 1 was found guilty, and he got only 2 months' imprisonment for it. Aboriginals found guilty of murder were hanged.
But the tactics they used was to plant spies, if you like to call them that, in among the settlers, and ask them to act as guides and that. And then when they got the information that they required, they then divided the force by sending them off on false errands. And then they started to eliminate either the people that they sent away or the people that remained behind. So they were quite clever at fighting a guerrilla war.
Would they use this as a shelter?
Oh yes, Graham, they would have used it. Hunting parties would have used it. And the parties that were fighting the settlers, they certainly would have used it. Because it'd be a pretty difficult place to find a place like this. You know, it's well protected by the rocks and that sort of thing.
The Gunditjmara were winning the war. The settlers were desperate. No one felt safe. They sent for help from the new colonial government in the recently founded city of Melbourne. In 1842, the authorities dispatched to the Western District a military force aimed at subduing the natives. This ragtag force was called the Border Police.
Now, manned mainly by ex-convicts who'd been in the British Army in other countries and were shipped out here for various misdeeds.
The Gunditjmara outwitted the border police. They simply melted into the landscape. Trackers were needed. A native police force was recruited from tribes around Melbourne. For provisions, these people were prepared to fight against strangers from a distant land for whom they felt no kinship. The spear was no match for the unbeatable combination of tracking ability and the gun. The death knell was sounding for the Gunditjmara. After several terrible massacres at places like Tower Hill and at Lake Condah, the tribe was defeated.
This, of course, was the beginning of the end of their freedom in that particular era, because now they were being rounded up and taken willy-nilly to the number of missions and settlements that were being set up. And the numbers of Aboriginals were diminished by diseases, the introduced diseases, and of course by starvation. What was left of them were rounded up, and some were sent on to the Condah mission, and the others were brought here to the Framlingham mission.
They were taught to be good Christians, told to forget their own language and traditions, and to speak only English. They were given English names like Clark, Lovett, Austin and Rose to further obliterate their identity.
People were thrown together where previously they'd never lived so closely together and under such a bond and under such stringent missionary control. They were discouraged from practicing any of their traditional ways or practicing any of their traditional culture.
But the Aboriginals did learn quite a lot in the schools, and they became literate to such a degree that they took written complaints to the colonial authorities about conditions on some of the missions, thus confounding the theory of one of their protectors that they should be treated like children or lunatics. The mission managers had extraordinary powers. They could order floggings, withhold rations, or cause so-called malcontents to be jailed or banished to a mission on the other side of the state. By 1870, the Aboriginal population had been dramatically eroded. Disease, war, alcohol, the dispossession of their lands had all taken a terrible toll. Yet, they still managed to be a thorn in the side of the now respectable, populous and gold-rich citizens of Victoria.
There were comparatively few people by this time of pure blood, pure Aboriginal blood I mean, and those that were left were mainly old people. The others, of course, were the products of fraternisation between Aboriginal women and white settlers or workers or whatever it was. So a final solution to the Aboriginal problem was looked for and found. It came in the form of the 1886 Land Rights Act. The Act stated that only full-bloods or half-castes over 34 years of age or children who were too young to earn their own living could remain on the reserves.
Now the managers of Aboriginal reserves had the power to break up families by evicting so-called half-castes from the reserves. They could send children into domestic service or other employment without pay, protection or legal right. It was a form of slavery. The Act was designed to integrate part Aboriginals into white society so that when the full-bloods eventually died out, there would be no Aboriginal problem. It was perhaps more subtle than Hitler's final solution, but equally as effective. It was genocide by assimilation. In the meantime, towns and cities had appeared in what had once been Gunditjmara country, places like Portland, Port Fairy and Warrnambool. Memorials were raised to the pioneers. Few praised the almost vanquished Aboriginal. However, they did have a few friends and protectors, like Scottish pioneer James Dawson and his daughter Isabella. They recognised that the Aboriginals had a culture and a heritage, and recorded the language of the area and the customs for posterity. Dawson even built a monument to the Aboriginals.
Then came World War I, and a recruiting officer, or a couple of recruiting officers, visited both Condah Mission and Framlingham Mission. They encouraged the young Aboriginal men that were eligible to join the army, and many of them did. As a matter of fact, one of the people that did join was a fellow called William Reginald Rawling. He was one of the first Aboriginals to win a military medal. I'm very proud of that uncle of mine.
14 young Gunditjmara men went to the war and served with distinction. 3, including William Rawlings, were killed in action.
Hannah Lovett, and her husband, James Lovett, had 5 sons. They all fought in combat units. Every one of them was in a frontline combat unit, and they all returned. Not one of them was wounded.
In 1918, the Conda men returned victorious, only to find that part of their home, the Conda mission, was soon to be cut up as soldier settlement blocks for white soldiers.
It was an arrogant thing for the Australian government to do. It just showed, in effect, how they felt about the Aboriginal people.
It took another 65 years for Conda to be returned to Gunditjmara care, but as a national park. Their tribal brothers at Framlingham also had to fight for land rights.
We Gunditjmara people have always been involved in fighting for our traditional homelands, and I think you see that very pronounced, say, at Conda and Framlingham Forest. I think it's mainly because we feel that it is home to us, it's dear to us. Well, it's very hard to explain in white man's terms what the land really means to us. I think it can be best said that it is a religion to us.
In World War II, the Gunditjmara sent 11 warriors once again to fight for the country which had done its best to wipe them out. One was to make history. His name, Reg Saunders.
Well, I was born at Warrnambool, in a place called Bunyip Lane, would you believe, just outside of the Pernem Mission. And when Mum died, I was 4 years old, and Dad took myself and my younger brother, Harry, with him, and we just travelled around the place. He was an itinerant, sort of first of the professional footballers. He played with various teams in the Western District. And then, of course, it came time to go to school. So I finished up with grandmother and grandfather, James Arden, over here at Conda Mission. And from the time I was about 6 until the time I was 14, I went to school at the old mission. My father was a returned soldier from World War I, as many other Aboriginals were around here. And I said to Dad, I'm going to go to the war. And Dad said, well, yes. He said, I think you should go. He said, I think there should be a male from every family should go. I travelled to most places that my division went to. I went to the Middle East, like most of the boys did. I fought in Greece, and then I was taken prisoner on Crete for a short period. I broke out of that and managed to escape and lived with the Greeks for a year, which was a marvellous experience. And we escaped on a funny old boat from Crete, which was quite remarkable, really. And then I went back to New Guinea. My brother was subsequently killed in New Guinea at, I think it was Sanananda, in about November 41 or 42. And one day my commanding officer said, would you like to get a commission? And I burst out laughing at him. I said, me with a commission? How would I ever make a commissioned officer? He said, well, I think you'd make a jolly good commissioned officer. So I had to then get a commission to please my commanding officer and also to please myself. And then suddenly, one day, I was a civilian. I wasn't allowed to kill anybody anymore. I had a 7-pound suit and a 2-pound hat and a pair of black shoes, and I was a civilian. I didn't have anyone to support me. I'd lost everything, so I had to go back, and I also had a wife. I wasn't detrained. No one took me away and said, look, now you're a civilian, these are the things that are expected of you. There was no period at all. I just had to go from one straight to another. It wasn't like training to be a soldier. I had to be trained to be a civilian, and I had to train myself. So I joined the tramway service, and that gave me a uniform. It gave me some degree of order of command, and it gave me a responsibility, and there was a clock there that I had to work to, which was very like a military thing. Life wasn't easy because there were so many young men like myself that were looking for jobs that were untrained for anything other than to be soldiers. So there was a fair amount of competition, and I think being black didn't help very much in those days. It may help more today, but in those days it certainly was no help at all. And all the time, a black man of my years had to keep on proving that he was as good as the next person. He wasn't accepted. There was no face value. There was no straight-out acceptance by people. Even though the Australians say we are not racist, they are racist in that sense. They may not be aware of it themselves, but they are. If you were standing in the queue, for argument's sake, it didn't matter who you were. If you were standing in the queue, you would be the last to get the attention of the shopkeeper or whatever it happened to be. They always tried to push you aside. And so that sort of thing I had to contend with. My wife had to contend with it. I didn't take it very kindly, and neither did my wife, but we managed to survive. And then Korea came along, and the military people asked for those people that had had officers' experience in World War II. So I said, well, here's an opportunity of rejoining the army. My wife was happy about it. So I went off into the Korean War, and I was promoted to captain. I had a very good eye for ground, and I think all Aboriginals naturally do have a good eye for ground. I'm very perceptive. I can see movement where a lot of people don't see movement. I can see variation in foliage. And I had very excellent hearing, which suited me ideally for night fighting, because I know that the enemy very often wasn't as proficient in night movement as I was. After the Korean War, my turn in the Korean War, I returned to Australia, and I discovered I was too old to go on active service again, so I decided to leave the army. I didn't like what was happening in the army, the national service thing and things like that. People were wasting their time, and so I decided to leave the army. So finally I left the army, and I went back to civilian life. I then worked on the waterfront as a shipping clerk for some time, and then I worked with various engineering firms on technical jobs and other little jobs around the place. And then finally, about 1969, I was invited by some very mysterious person to join the public service as a liaison officer with the Department of Aboriginal Affairs.
Reg Saunders returned to Gunditjmara country with the tribe's latest hero, Graham Brooke.
What's it feel like to be back home?
Great, mate. Really great. I feel like crying. It's so wonderful. Well, think of it, mate, when you're belting up those world champions.
Yeah.
This is the best, and you'll be doing it for us.
The magnificent fighting spirit of the Gunditjmara also found an outlet in sport. The tribe has produced many fine athletes, cricketers, footballers, and of course, boxers.
Well, I was a wrestler with Jimmy Sharma's travelling boxing troupe for a period of 20 years. And in that boxing troupe, there were many Aboriginals. In fact, the majority of boxers were Aboriginals. And I'm not sure why. Was it the economic reasons, the social reasons, the easy way of life? And we'd go to Warrnambool and Portland and do the shows. And when we'd get to Warrnambool, we'd have all the Framingham boxers, well-known fellas like Snowball Roach was one, Banjo Clark and the Austins. It was a hard life, but tough and enjoyable. But an Aboriginal's way of life has always been, he's had no cream. When you won in a boxing tent, everybody, all the local whites would pat you on the back, and I noticed this on many occasions. If an Aboriginal lost, nobody went near him. Well, to be accepted in the white society, you had to do better than the white men.
The most famous boxer of Gunditjmara blood is Lionel Rose, who held the world bantamweight crown for 1968 and 69. His second cousin and heir presumptive is Graham Brooke.
Graham Brooks is a very lucky boy because he's of two people. His mother's Gunditjmara and his father's white. And Graham's lucky because he's got the tradition of his mother's people, and he's got the traditions of his father's people. So he's got a sophistication and a degree of sophistication that only people of two different races can have. And so I think Graham's lucky. He also has the natural talents, apparently, of the Gunditjmara people, because they were good fighters, and Graham apparently has got the same wonderful inheritance.
It's not surprising that Graham's a fighter because it's in his blood on both sides of our family. On Gwen's side, you had Lionel Rose, Harry Hayes, Harper Thomas, and on my side, my great-grandfather, my brother, and so that's where he's got his natural ability.
Well, I was born up in Warrnambool. I was reared up on Framlingham settlement. I'd lost my mother at a very young age. I was about 2 when I could remember. My father was there, but I didn't see that much of him. He sort of travelled a lot. So an aunt of mine who had a family of 11 had taken my sister and me in, and another aunt had taken my younger sister in. I sort of grew up on Framlingham settlement. You know, life was hard there. We didn't sort of have the luxuries of what my kids have got today. But we had, you know, we were given a nice home with plenty of love in it from my auntie and plenty of food and that to eat.
I started working. I left school when I was 15. Started off as a storeman packer in Collingwood. Worked there for about 12 years.
And I was just sporting with relatives down in Melbourne. Different relatives, different friends moving from place to place. And I'd met my husband Graham now at one of the dances in Collingwood. I was maybe 16 then. So I'd married Graham then when I'd turned 17.
I started when I was about 17. I boxed for about 9 to 10 years. I had 40 to 50 odd fights. I fought on TV ringside 2 or 3 times, but I was just an average boxer.
We'd started off in the commission area. We saved up some money and then put a deposit on our home here, so we've been here since. Sharon is at the moment working at Immigration Department, and my daughter Leanne is at Social Security, same department as me but the head office, and Mark's still at school.
Well, I got rheumatoid arthritis. Doctors told me to finish work, so now I just do me running around promoting and helping Graham train. So
I'm currently now working as the Aboriginal Liaison Officer or Welfare Officer for Social Security at the Melbourne office.
Porky, it's 5:30 in the morning.
I get up 5 and my dad drops me off Broadmeadows and I run back. It's about 8 mile.
Apart from his physical prowess, life has not bestowed many material advantages on Graham Brooke. Both parents come from deprived backgrounds. They've struggled to make a good home for their family, and the family bond is strong. Graham, or Porky as he's been nicknamed since childhood, has never been academically inclined. He left school early. For him, boxing is everything. He is totally committed to it and thinks of little else.
I go to the gym at 4:30 and up in Essendon I punch the bags, sparring, skipping, exercise, Jack takes a few punches, and after that I just go home and rest, have dinner and go to bed early night.
I came from as a baby. He was a baby with these big fat chubby cheeks, and my sister always used to sort of like pinch his cheeks. I just started calling him Porky, and it stuck to him since then. I called him Porky from a very young age, and even the school accepted that, and the teachers at school started calling him Porky. Graham's always been an all-round sportsman, played baseball. He'd played soccer for 3 years, and he'd even had a go at basketball, and he was good at long-distance running. I never sort of dreamed he'd take up boxing.
14 I started. I just went up the gym when I was 14 and just started from there. I just go and watch Lionel train a lot. Lionel was my idol, and I think that's why I wanted to, try a bit of boxing out. He sort of inspired me to fight. Lionel gave me the green trunks that I fight in all the time. Lionel he gave me them when I was 10 years of age, and I just locked them away in the drawer. Hope one day I'd be a fighter. And he said to me, if you ever box, wear these in your first professional fight. And I did. I wear them every fight now. My good luck charm, I think, them shorts.
Well, I think he's the most skillful boxer that I've had here since Lionel Rose was here. And he's a very dedicated boy. He's ambitious. He wants to get to the top.
Okay.
He's a natural boxer. He's got the Aboriginal speed of hand, quick of eye, quick reflexes. And with the dedication and his training, which is a gem to training, I think he is the best boxer I've had here since Lionel.
Fighting Gunditjmara, Graham Brook, I have great pleasure in presenting to him to hold for a little while, because this wonderful trophy, the perpetual trophy, Fighter of the Year, the Merv Williams Sporting Globe Trophy. Honoured are Tony Mundine, 1980, Barry Michael, 1981, Paul Ferreri, 1982, and Graham Brook, 1983.
Just like to thank Sir Billy for awarding this to me. I'd like to thank Mum and Dad, Jack, Kevin Hawes, Benny, and everyone for coming here tonight. So.
Thank you, Graham. As you can see, his skill matches his modesty.
Well, Rob, I boxed a lot with Graham's cousin Lionel Rose many years ago, and Lionel, was I think the greatest Australian fighter we've ever seen. Graham is very much like Lionel. I mean, the style is very similar. Graham and I have sparred countless rounds together. We're very close friends, actually. I mean, there's a lot of, there is a big possibility we will end up meeting in the ring. We will both go in with, being friends is going to be tough. I've got a lot of respect for him. I think that he's got a great future. I think he's definitely a potential world champion. As I said, he's got those attributes, reflexes, punching power, and also toughness. I think we have yet to see Graham really tested against a good puncher and a good boxer.
I know that Graham doesn't like to be compared with Lionel for obvious reasons, but at times there's an uncanny similarity. There are certain moves that Lionel did that helped make Lionel what he was. One in particular was a movement of the shoulder, a dip of the shoulder when he threw a rip to the body and then a hook off the rib. Graham does exactly the same thing, exactly the same movement. And when you see Graham do it, you get a feeling of deja vu because you think, man, that's Lionel. And it's uncanny.
I really think he's got everything. I think he's going to be great. He's going to be around for a long time.
Traditionally, Aboriginal boxers have come from materially deprived backgrounds, often affected by ill health and unemployment. For them, boxing is the only means of earning money and prestige. It's possibly an escape from their subordinate, even outcast role in European-dominated Australia. But boxing has not proved to be a way out for Aborigines. Few have received lasting financial gains or even lasting recognition.
He's got the ability to become an Australian, Commonwealth or world champion, but that's up to himself. He's got to be dedicated and train hard at it. Be a hermit like Lionel did for 5 years.
All it is just you got to have dedication. You got to train and cut a lot of things out of life. Late nights, no drinking, smoking, all that. And I just box. After fighting it, I'll go out a couple of times. I've got a girlfriend, nothing serious, nothing. After the fight, I'd take you out for tea and that. I don't go out much with her, but I like to be home all the time. I like to chill at home. Nah. I hardly never go out. Just once after the fight I go out. I'm back in training again. No, I like it. I like it. I love it.
Well, Lionel came from a family that had lost his father at a very early age, and a lot of poverty existed there. And of course, he had to support the family. But with Graham, he's got a very solid family, a good mother and father and the rest of the family, and they look after his interests for him. And I think that's a very big step to help him in his background.
Yeah, me and my dad's pretty close. He knows what it's like because he's been there himself, and he just sits down quiet and just watches the fight. So he's pretty cool about it because he's been there. He knows what it's like. Mum, she's nervous. She loves it, but she gets nervous, really nervous.
I think I feel it more than him when I'm at the fight. So when he sort of gets hit or I think he's getting hurt, I really get nervous. I remember sitting at a fight in Geelong, and I've never seen any blood on Graham ever since he was boxing, even in his amateur days. So I was sitting ringside, and then my daughter started crying, saying he was bleeding. So I got a sort of a fright after that. So every fight now, I always sit right back.
It doesn't worry me all that,
What doesn't?
Getting hurt, all that, because got to expect that in there.
The Graham Brook magic could be the reason for the resurgence in boxing. His followers grow in number, and he's being hailed by the press as the new Lionel Rose. But disaster is always just around the corner for a fighter. Earlier this year, he was rushed off to hospital for an emergency operation.
With Graham being out of action for over 8 months due to his appendix operation, it has made things even tougher. But I feel that with the big crowd we drew at the last fight, that from now on, it's going to be only good.
A fighter's boxing life is usually quite short. Few boxers are experienced in financial affairs, so wisely, a trust has been established on Graham's behalf. In addition, Graham has been guaranteed employment with Aboriginal hostels when his boxing career eventually ends.
He's a gardener, or sort of a handyman, a gardener, cleaner. He likes it because it's outdoor work. He never likes to sort of work indoor or office work or factory work. It just doesn't suit him. And with this job, it fits in with his boxing training.
My advice to him is to concentrate on boxing and amass his fortune if he can make it, and then go into some type of business, investments and in a business, because you've got your name and people will come to your business. It may be a milk bar, it may be anything small, but the name will attract them. And but I don't believe they should do it while they're boxing, because you must concentrate on that and that alone. And when he finishes, let's hope he goes into business.
I haven't really thought about that. I haven't really sat down and thought about what I'm going to do after, but I wouldn't mind, open my own gym up or something like that. Train little kids.
The official weigh-in for Graham Brook is 62.14. Thanks, Graham.
I get a lot of support from the Aboriginal people. My cousins, all that come from Bairnsdale, Warrnambool, all the way down, just see me fight.
Any Aboriginal sportsman that gets up there, they support him, he's a symbol, he's doing something for them, and they ally themselves to him.
So every time I go to the ring, I carry that Aboriginal flag, and that's our flag, it's our colours. Yeah, and I'm proud of it.
this stage of his career, at his age, Lionel was world champion, and so I think that Graham will eventuate to that later on, because I deliberately held him back, because I think he's unbeaten at this stage of his career, and you can't ask for any more, and I can see that he's going to go a long way.
My ambition's to win the Australian title first, and I hope the world title.
Yeah, he's got the ability to do it, yeah.
The bout with Juan Escobar was an important one for Graham. Beating the Mexican took him one step closer to his ultimate goal, and in late 1984 he became Commonwealth lightweight champion. He was on his way to the world title. He can stir crowds, both European and Aboriginal. Exciting, unpredictable, shy outside the ring. He is fast, tough, a natural fighter in the ring. He is the latest Gunditjmara hero, the warrior they hope will return them a measure of respect. But history is against Graham Brook making it, for boxing has traditionally been a sport of misfortune for those who practice it. Almost every fighter emerges scarred in some way, many with some form of brain damage. Boxers tend to retire early. Some are forced to. Few boxers end up with much money. And fight money, if it does come at all, comes too quick and too much for many young boxers, especially those from deprived backgrounds. After manager's percentage, living expenses and taxes are deducted, the residual has often been whittled away on women, alcohol, and gambling. Generally speaking, Aboriginal boxers have had few reputable financial advisors interested in their welfare. The boxing world has always been run by white men. Then there are the strong kinship obligations to other clan members, where the wealth is shared among relatives. The money gone, the prestige, if any, dissipates also. The prime example of this was Lionel Rose. Rose became world champion, was feted by the media, awarded the MBE by the Queen, given a big reception at the Melbourne Town Hall, and proclaimed Australian of the Year. They say he had earned over $350,000. Today, the money is gone, the prestige almost forgotten. The press appears to highlight his alleged misdemeanors. So what chance has Graham Brook? Graham knows little of finance. However, he does have strong support from his parents, Jack Rennie, and the experts who handle his trust. These people are well aware of the boxer's lot and are taking steps to see to it that Graham does not end up on the scrap heap. Graham himself is a very stable young man who enjoys a quiet family life. But if he does win out in the end, he will be the exception. Time alone will tell whether it is a blessing for him to be today's Fighting Gunditjmara.
Just box. Yeah.
This, then, is the story of the Gunditjmara. Although the fields of battle have changed over the years, from southwest Victoria to the Somme and Flanders, from Greece and Crete and the Middle East to New Guinea and Korea, from the travelling tent shows to the great stadiums of the world, to football fields, athletic tracks and cricket pitches, the Gunditjmara are still fighting the same fight for survival. All their neighbours have long since disappeared. The Bungandij, the Chaparong, the Kirai. Where are they now? How did the Gunditjmara survive the Aboriginal Holocaust? And paradoxically, why do the remnants of this once proud tribe cling to a heritage they can barely remember? No one really knows for sure. But what is certain is that the fighting spirit lives on today. The spirit of the Fighting Gunditjmara.